I'm going to speak from the position of a practitioner, right, rather than theory. We have this amazing platform at the City of Palo Alto to innovate and create best practices, share what works well, and we share what doesn't work so well too. But I'm going to start with a story. I want to take you to Boston in 2010. In Boston in 2010, the snow was pretty bad. It was really bad, in fact. It hadn't been that bad for a very, very long time. And one of the things that seems almost unintuitive is there's more fires that happen in homes, like fires going on home when it's snowing than when it's not, because people are having fires. They're having probably fires for the first time, and there's maybe a nest or something in their chimney. And so the fire service is called out a lot. And one of the things they have to do is find the fire hydrant when there's a fire, right? And so the thing about fires is you want to get to them quickly. You want to, find the hydrant, get the water going, and put the fire out, because the quicker it gets turned off, the more people you could save, and the more property you'd save. So when it snows, they get covered, and this is a problem. I mean, it's never really been solved well. Well, how could we solve this problem in a very different way? So there's this enterprising software developer goes out to Boston as part of Code for America, an organization that does this type of thing, and over the course of about a week, builds a solution that basically enables homeowners to adopt the fire hydrant in their neighborhood. And it sounds kind of crazy that you would take this over and say, I promise to take care of this fire hydrant. When it snows, I promise to dig around it and make it available to the fire service. It was so successful that people competed over the fire hydrants. And there was a little kind of game in it, in that if you didn't check in and say, yes, I've been looking after it, somebody else could grab that fire hydrant and take it over. So in 2011, when there was snow again, and this service was fully up and running, people who had adopted cleaned them up. And of course, the fire service could find them quicker and put out fires quicker. And so it's kind of an interesting idea. So a couple of things if you think about it. First of all, it didn't take 2 years to build and millions of dollars. It took 1 week, and I don't think there was any cost to it. It required people to participate, to engage. It required smartphones and a web page. So it was kind of unique in that it brought people together in a different way. It created a solution in a very unique way, and very representative of the way we need to think about the future of our cities. Now, I want to tell you a little addition to this story that not a lot of people will share with you, but I will. After the success of Adopt a Hydrant, the government of Hawaii called Boston and said, we're interested in this Adopt a Hydrant program. Now, the problem with that is, if you know, there's no snow in Hawaii, right? So what on earth are they calling Boston for? Turns out they have a similar problem in Hawaii. They have occasionally, it doesn't happen often, tsunamis. And because of the tsunamis, there are the tsunami warning horns all around the islands. And because they're not used often, they're not really cared for that well. And so what happens is they get vandalized, and mostly the batteries get stolen, right? People steal the batteries and sell them, right? So the idea was, can we use your software to create Adopt a Tsunami Horn? And of course, Boston said, this is absolutely open source. You can take it, it's yours, and make it adopt a Tsunami Horn. And so no cost. They just have to, find and replace the text from Adopt a Hydrant to Adopt a Tsunami. So there's some interesting things happening in cities around cooperation, around software, about open source. I'm a little optimistic. And I say a little because there's a lot of problems to solve. Because this is the city, this is the world in 2015, going on 2016. It's a world in which we're now majority urban. You've heard this right. Out of 7.2 billion, approximately, something like that, we're well over 3.5 billion people now living in cities. And over the next 20 years, 30 years, another 2 billion people will join them. It means that in a place like this is Chennai, India, this population here in 2015, this is going to grow significantly from what you see right now. And so when I look at this picture, as you should, can you imagine doubling the amount of cars in this picture? Yeah, imagine what the impact is already on the environment just by looking at this picture. Right? The amount of carbon being spewed into the atmosphere. That infrastructure, I would argue, too, is borderline, right? You know, there's a lot of people there. There's insufficient bridges. Who knows how stable those bridges are over time? So it's not a very rosy picture. And this is not uncharacteristic of a lot of big cities in the world, right? You know, we have the opportunity now to build new cities, but the vast majority of cities in the world have sort of organically grown and have these massive challenges. And they have massive challenges today. Imagine when they double in size, right? And so our homes are going to be in cities. Our homes are going to be the place where our city is going to be the place where we work, we play, we raise families. So when I give this presentation a lot, this is not some abstract presentation. This actually is about each of you and about me. This is about where we're going to spend our lives. It's about where our children are going to spend their lives. So I'd argue that the future belongs to cities, right? For sure. We will be an urban planet almost in its entirety within about 40 to 50 years. But we're really not ready. The challenges are absolutely enormous. Now, some people come to my presentations and they're interested in social good, right? They want to do a good thing, and we should applaud that. Some people come to my presentations because they want an opportunity. They want to know, where can I make money? Well, if you fall into either of those categories, this is meaningful to you. The opportunity to innovate in cities is worth trillions of dollars over the next few years. It's one of the growth areas in our economy, which can be rather gloomy if you look out 10 to 20 years in terms of automation and robotics and work available for human beings to do. So I've been going around talking about this new idea that we have to create an operating system, a new operating system for smarter cities. And that's really what I want to talk to you about for the next about 20 minutes. So some of the stuff that's happening today, we have to ask the question, why is it happening today? Why couldn't we do some of this cool stuff that I'm going to tell you about here in a few moments 5 years ago? Well, very often you have to have this sort of like nexus of tech. You have to have a few things that come into play in order to get a brand new technology. And I'm going to use the example of Waze. Who uses Waze? Probably, or you've heard of it, right? You know, if you use it like me, it's massively useful, right? There may be a competitor that you use, but it's great to be able to see and understand traffic that's far away. I mean, if you're sitting in traffic and you have no idea if there's a crash ahead or police or something, not only can you know that information, but you also know a better route to get home potentially. So it's very useful. It didn't exist a few years ago because it couldn't. You had to have a nexus of tech to make it happen. You have to have very good connectivity generally, right? You've got to have this social component because people are creating value in this by participating. Like the data is only one piece of it, but you have to have people who bother to say, I'm sitting in traffic. I do that. I don't know why I do it. It's they call it psychic income, apparently. Psychic income. You need to have ubiquitous smartphones, right? And we're getting there. In America, the numbers are staggering now. 80% or so of people have smartphones. Not the case worldwide yet, but quickly getting up there. You have to have cloud, so you have to have a cloud infrastructure. So I share this with you because it's a combination of tech which makes something like Waze. And so I'm optimistic that, I'm a little optimistic, as I said earlier, because we have technology playing an enormous role, an increasing role over time in how we're going to run and have great cities. So let's talk about a few little aspects here, and I'll give a specific example as I wrap up towards the end. Some people will challenge me around data in cities and say it's interesting, but it's not really life and death, is it? Well, absolutely it's life and death, right? If we can manage data in our cities and our urban settings in a better way, we can save lives. I mean, we potentially spoke about that with the adopt a fire hydrant solution. So what you're looking at in this picture is the aftermath of the Haiti earthquake a few years ago. This was a significant event, devastating. Look at that destruction there, right? Around about the time of the Haiti event, which is not so many years ago, it's within the last decade, the way in which we would respond to this is basically what we call, very scientifically, best effort, right? So how do you know where to send doctors and first responders? Well, you know, there's a network of people who would find a way to communicate, and potentially you would, over time, get to places that needed help. But we didn't really optimize it. We didn't really get to the places quickly where the most need was needed. Now, what's interesting about the Haiti earthquake, and something we can learn about and learn from here in the Bay Area, is even in this absolute devastation, the cell network still worked. It worked to the extent that it could support text messaging. I'm not saying there was broadband. There was some, fortunately, text messaging actually still worked after this. And so people were instructed to start to text codes to a particular place that would indicate the severity of an issue. For example, there's a person who's bleeding to death, that would be a certain type of number. There's a fire, there's a hole in the ground, you know, we don't have water or something like that. And now what happens is you start to aggregate those text messages onto a web page, and you begin to be able to triage in a way in which you can get to people quicker and you can prioritize issues. Now, when the earthquake happened in Nepal in the last 12 months, this is how we do it, right? This is now, a form of this is how we use data, smartphones or cell phones, and civic participation to get help to where help is needed quickly. So data is a matter of life and death. I want to show you this example. Sometimes when I have a bit more time, I'll spend more time on this, but we are going to go quick here, so I will kind of give you the answers. I won't quiz you. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at a heat map, clearly, you know that. And the purple area is a higher incidence of something. I'll tell you what it is. It's actually crime. This is crime in Durham. So the kind of purple area in the center there is a lot of crime, and as you go out, less and less crime. So you're like, well, so what? So there's data on crime, and we've mapped the data on heat maps against the map here, and that's interesting. What makes this picture interesting to me, and I hope you, is that it's crime that hasn't yet happened. Right? This is actually crime in the future. This is what we call predictive policing. Right? An emergent field which uses data and a whole lot of other inputs to be able to anticipate what crime might be on a certain time of day. It's not without controversy, let me tell you. So we call it experimental. But in the cities that do experiment with it, and one of them is Los Angeles, in the areas that it's used in, there is a double-digit reduction in the amount of crime that occurs. Because you think about if you knew, what is it today, Tuesday? If you knew on Saturday there was going to be crime in a certain neighborhood here, well, you might go in and do some neighbor outreach. You might try to figure out, what is it? Is there going to be some event? You might pre-position police or community outreach officers. It's kind of useful. So let's talk about Palo Alto a little bit here. I want to kind of make this practical. We recognize the value of data. We recognized very early on in my tenure. I'm about 4 years now at the city of Palo Alto, and it was one of the first things that I initiated. It was a recognition that data in a city context, first of all, is in abundance, right? In a world in which there's not enough money, not enough people, there's too many projects, too many challenges, we have an abundance of data. And the reality is in most government agencies, it's the most underutilized resource. It's in abundance and we don't use it. We've got to fix that. That's a disconnect, right? So if we can make available the data of the city of Palo Alto, well then others will begin to innovate around it and begin to build solutions. And that's all, by the way, on top of the fact that I just feel and others feel it's a right. It's a right to have access to your data, right? It's a right of our democracy, what makes our democracy strong. So it's not that we just said we're going to make data available. We said, and the mayor proclaimed this 2 years ago, all our data is going to be open by default. For a city of our size, that's unprecedented. Now, you'll see this in some areas in the world. We're just a small city. And so what we're trying to do is create models and ideas for the vast majority of American cities that are around about 100,000 people. Not for the small set of mega cities we have in America, but the vast majority of 100,000 people cities. And I'll say to you, I'll give it to you as a gift. You can access this right now, right? This site is live. You can access it on any device you have. And access, I think it's close to 100 data sets now about Palo Alto, everything from crime to demographics to energy use to our permits. It's quite a lot of things. When I asked our community what they wanted to see, no surprise, they wanted to see how do we spend our money? How do we spend the community's money? And so we opened up our budget information, not just for a year or for a few months, but 5 years of information, 5 years of budgets and 5 years of actuals. And it's completely open. There's no restrictions on it. You can download it in its entirety if you have a lot of time and would be interested in that. But there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people who are interested in our salaries, for example. And as government workers, that is open data. So you can go in here and figure out how much I earn. So what happens, though, when you start to make the data available? How do you start to create solutions and innovation and build a smart or smarter city? Well, so we start to make available permit data. Right? Permit data is something that we create a lot of. Like people want to build new kitchens or extensions to their homes or do something. So that is all information we make available. Now, usually it's kind of ugly information because it's, it's tabular, rows and columns of lots of data. It's much more useful if we can make it in a form that you could maybe just search by an address and get some nicely organized data on that permit. And so a company comes along and says, we're going to build a commercial company around that data, and we're going to do it for lots of cities. And so this solution that we have on our website, it's called Civic Insight, is built by a company who uses our data. Now, I just want to contrast that to the past. If we had queued this project up, it might not have happened yet, right? It might have cost $150,000, and would take maybe a year to build. Instead, we make the data available. We have it anyway, in a consumable way, a machine consumable way. A third party builds a solution and then goes commercial. They can actually make a business out of it. Now, I have to just talk about our trees, because Palo Alto translates into, it's El Palo Alto, into tall trees. And that tree, by the way, that the city's still named after still exists. It's near the railway tracks if you ever want to take a look at it. So we love our trees, as does the whole region, by the way, right? We love trees in Northern California. And we used to have a person that would go with a checkboard and sort of notate information, and then that board would be taken back to a database and entered into a database, and it wouldn't be accessible to anybody. Those days are over. Today, all tree data is available in Palo Alto. The name of the tree, the age of the tree, the disease the tree's had, when it's been last cut, if it's fallen down, if it's a problem, if it's going to be dug up. Everything you want to know about that tree is available to you right now if you want it. And I didn't know until I entered government, having spent over 20 years in the private sector, that people were into tree data as much as they are. They love trees, and they should be. Trees are wonderful. So let's kind of drill down, because this is a conference, after all, about connecting devices and people and systems and data. So what do we do around this? This is an opportunity area. Well, I want to talk about one of the solutions that you can just use right now. And it's called Palo Alto 311. It's a smartphone app. It's free. So if you come to Palo Alto or you live in Palo Alto, as I know many of you do here, download it. And what you can do with it, you can report stuff. Now think about how we used to report stuff in the past. You'd come to City Hall if you were bothered. I mean, who wants to do that, right? Go to City Hall, and you'd be handed a form. You fill out the form, you hand it back to somebody, and it's like a black hole. Where did that form go? Maybe nothing ever happens. You're reporting a pothole on your street that people will get injured. And we have some liability. We have to change that game. You can't have that. You can't have no accountability. So today you download this app, you see a pothole, you take a picture of it and hit submit. The picture goes to City Hall, goes to an engineer who then is dispatched. And the app informs you we've dispatched an engineer. The engineer makes an assessment. We email you that assessment or some summary of it. The engineer comes back then and fixes it. We tell you it's been fixed. And at the end of it, we ask you, how did we do? Tell us how we did. Were we fast enough? How was the quality? So complete transparency and accountability. It's a new day, right? It's really good for you and me as citizens, but it's really good for government too, because now we have a system that we can track issues, everything from abandoned bicycles to lights that are out on your street, or graffiti, or anything that annoys you, just report it. Now, this story isn't so innovative, right? To be honest with you, many, many cities do this. You're probably thinking that yourself. Redwood City, I believe, does this. Many cities. And so what's so unique about that? Well, we're happy to have done it, and you can pretty much report many, many issues. But we took it one step further. We took the underlying data. Remember, when you report an issue, that's pretty useful information for a city, right? Now, we took that data, and what we do with that data is in near real time, we publish it as open data over a map, by the way. Now, you can download it in different formats, but this is the default view. And you can see in almost real time what's happening at the City of Palo Alto right now in terms of our infrastructure. For the very first time, you can see the invisible. We can see the invisible. We were never able to see in aggregate everything that's happening at the City of Palo Alto, right? Nobody's really doing this. We are leading the field on this, right? And so we can do things like, for example, look for trends, right? I don't know when I took this screenshot, but let's say it was a year ago, and you look at the highest number, and you can drill into this. It's dynamic. And we can see that in an area, there's a repetition of some particular issue. Well, now we can actually do something about it so it doesn't reoccur. We're not just playing whack-a-mole, right? We send someone out, we fill in a hole, or we eliminate graffiti, and then 2 weeks later we come out and do the same thing. We can actually get to the source. So it changes the way in which governments can actually operate. Now, we've talked about connected cities, civic participation. Let's talk about the Internet of Things in the context of cities. I'm a champion for the idea that the Internet of Things will be foundational to building, redesigning, and reinventing the future of our cities. I really believe this strongly, and based on what I'm seeing in terms of the trend. I'm also seeing it as an amazing growth opportunity. So what are we doing? Well, the first thing we did, we started this about a year ago. We've converted our traffic signal system to an IP network. So this was analog, as most traffic signals are. Now it's IP, so it's like any network. We have incredible visibility to what's going on. It can be entirely dynamic because it's programmable now, right? So every traffic signal is a node that can be programmed. Now, what else can we do with that? Well, we can start to put sensors on those traffic signals, and we're doing that. Why might we do that? Well, for some of it, we don't know yet, but there are some good examples too. In a busy intersection, the question might be asked, is it a safe intersection? And for example, are there a lot of children at a certain time of the day who pass on this intersection? And what we would have done in the past is we would have sent somebody out, again with a checkboard probably, who would have spent 4 hours and sort of done little checks like this. And we would have had a point in time at a point in time of the day. But by putting sensors on our traffic signals that are part of an IP network, we basically have an abundance of sensor data 24 hours a day indefinitely. And we can start to analyze that and determine what's going on. And the sensor data will allow us to do things like, for example, we can tell the difference between a person, a car, a truck, and a bicycle. We can also tell what direction they're headed in. We can also tell things like what the light is like, the noise levels. There's lots of information that become useful when you start to think about how you might redesign certain intersections in Palo Alto. Might we want to put other things in place so that it is safer for children to cross when schools are let out? Right. Now, so we're doing that, and that's well underway. So, but what does that actually enable later? It's possible now that we're collecting an enormous amount of data about traffic. And so it turns out the car companies are kind of interested in that, right? Turns out that in Palo Alto, we have some of the innovation centers for the biggest car companies in the world, like Ford and BMW. Google, aren't they now a car company almost, right? So they came to us and said, we'd like this data because we will consume it, we might analyze it, help us in our car design. We might actually feed it in real time to our cars because that might be good for us. It might be good for us particularly when we start to build and enable self-driving cars. So we're opening up all sorts of new possibilities, and I hope I can come back in a year from now and tell you about the cool things that the car companies are doing. I'm sure the car companies will tell you the cool things they're doing with this stuff, right? Now, I want to just wrap up with a couple of big ideas, just to kind of get you thinking about the possibilities. The challenge with innovation, and I've spent my whole career in innovation, is that people build solutions for problems the way they look today. We are very challenged by building solutions that are not yet building solutions for problems that don't yet exist, and we anticipate that they will exist. But that's how we have to think about the future of cities. Things are going to change very quickly in the next 5 to 10 years, at a rate that we actually have never seen in history. So I want to ask you a couple of questions. They're just rhetorical. Just think about them. So we've been spending a lot of time improving our traffic signal infrastructure, right? Now, it's entirely possible that in some years from now, cars will drive themselves. So the question is, why do we need traffic signals? Right? We're spending an awful lot of time strategizing about traffic signals, potentially in a world that doesn't need traffic signals, right? We won't necessarily have to worry about crosswalks and things like that, because the cars may be smart enough to deal with it. They don't need to look at a red light to know to stop. In fact, they know to stop when there's other traffic coming, and likely they'll be safer than, we already have evidence that they're safer than humans driving cars, which my view is, 20 years from now we'll say, we drove cars? Our kids will say, our grandchildren, we humans drove cars? That's ridiculous. Right? You can quote me on that. But cars will become completely different. You know, you can't think of a car with 4 seats and 2 people in the front, one with a driver and a wind. You don't need any of that if the car drives itself. Cars become completely different. Do you need to own a car in a world in which a car can turn up on demand? Do you need to have parking spaces when there's an on-demand fleet of self-driving cars? Wow, think about that. You know, you buy a car and you spend a fortune on it, right? You don't drive it 90% of the time. You buy the most expensive thing in your life, the second most expensive thing, you don't use it 90% of the time. It would be awfully convenient not to have to buy a car if there was an alternative. And it'd be great not to have massive areas of our beautiful land paved over for cars in the event they need to park. So I'm going to finish on one story. I don't see a clock anywhere, so I'm kind of making this up. I think I'm at about 30 minutes, right? So I want to talk about an application that brings together many of the concepts I shared with you today. This application is called PulsePoint. And so it was actually the fire chief in Palo Alto, Chief Nickel, who came to me one day and talked to me about this new idea that he'd been talking to with a company called PulsePoint. Basically what happens is it's built on this idea that if you have a heart event, a cardiac event, like a heart attack, the sooner we can apply CPR or get medical help, the higher probability it is that you'll live. It's a pretty good thing. And the higher probability, if you do live, that you will have less damage to your heart muscle, right? So it's all about speed. So a little bit of health information there. And a heart attack can happen anytime to pretty much anybody. So this, to me, seems like a neat thing to be thinking about. Now, how can we look at this problem in the context of the Internet of Things and smarter cities? Well, if people have this app, there's 2 types of people that can participate. One is if you're the person having the heart event, or you're with somebody who's having a heart event, you can alert. You can basically say, whoa, he's having a heart attack, or she is, I'm going to press this button. The second stakeholder is a person who knows how to apply CPR. And so if you put those 2 things together, someone's having a heart attack, someone informs that this is happening, and third, somebody locally, nearby, has the app and gets notified, they can rush over and apply CPR, and it'll alert an ambulance. So the whole thing sort of happens quickly. So when you listen to me saying that, you're probably thinking in your head, well, a lot of things have to go right for this to work. Right? People have to have the app, it has to be working, you have to have a person nearby who has CPR expertise. You know, it just all has to work right, and the probability of that is probably quite slim. And actually, that's what I thought. I thought, this is an amazing story, but will it ever be used and will it ever work? And so I had that question. It was too good and too easy for us to implement not to. We just had to do it. So we go ahead and do it, and some time passes. About a year passed, nothing happened. So I learn about a story. Turns out somebody in the region has a heart event. Pulse point kicks in. Someone comes over, saves that, comes over, applies CPR. Person goes to the hospital. They live. A person lived. A person survived a heart event that they wouldn't have survived had pulse point not existed. I was convinced this was worth every second that I had spent on it and my team. The guy who was saved is convinced that every second we paid on this, that it made sense. And so I wanted to leave you with that story because this is really meaningful stuff and really important stuff. The company who does this makes some money, but at the same time, they also save lives. So I'm going to finish on this point. We're just at the beginning. It would seem like perhaps through my little storytelling today that this is well advanced, it's well rolled out, we're well underway to becoming smarter cities across the world. The reality is we haven't even started. Right? We're just at the very beginning. The opportunity is ahead. This is one place, if you start now, you could be the leader, or your organizations could be the leader in this in the years ahead. So I will finish on a question that I always ask everybody, because I want this to be a call to action. No matter what you do, are you ready to help create a new operating system for cities? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.